In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Spiral, where ancient dragon-like beings ruled star systems with magic that could bend reality itself, humanity was considered nothing more than primitive scavengers, clever with tools, perhaps, but utterly powerless in a universe governed by mystical forces. The Draconian Empire had watched these metalworkers spread across the galaxy for centuries, amused by their stubborn reliance on crude technology while surrounded by beings who could manipulate matter with thought alone. Dragons lived for millennia, their scales harder than neutronium, their breath capable of igniting stars. When they fell ill, only the most powerful arcane healers could hope to help them. So when Maintenance Chief Jake Morrison, a grease-stained mechanic from a forgotten mining station, accidentally touched the dying Princess Seraphina during what should have been a routine repair job, nobody expected what happened next. Especially not the Dragon Queen herself, who had traveled across 3 star systems to watch her daughter's final moments. What they discovered that day would shatter everything the galaxy thought it knew about humans, dragons, and the true nature of power itself. Because sometimes the most extraordinary magic comes from the most ordinary hands. The universe was about to learn why humanity had really survived so long in a galaxy full of gods. Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve, leaving another grease stain to join the countless others that decorated his maintenance uniform. The mining station's ventilation system had been acting up again, and in a place where dragons breathed fire as casually as humans exhaled carbon dioxide, proper air circulation wasn't just important, it was survival. The tool in his weathered hands looked primitive compared to the crystalline technology that surrounded him. While the Draconian Empire built their ships from living metal that responded to thought and powered their cities with captured starlight, Jake relied on good old-fashioned wrenches, welders, and a lifetime of knowing how things worked. His human colleagues often joked that he could fix anything with duct tape and determination, but Jake knew better. Every repair was a puzzle, every broken system a challenge that required understanding, patience, and sometimes a little creative thinking. Station Omega-7 hung in the shadow of Dracarys Prime's third moon, its metal corridors a stark contrast to the organic curves of dragon architecture. The station served as a neutral trading post where different species could conduct business without the formal protocols required on dragon homeworlds. Humans like Jake were tolerated here because they served a useful purpose, maintaining the mechanical systems that dragons found beneath their attention, yet somehow still needed for their comfort. The dragons who frequented the station treated humans with the kind of absent politeness one might show a particularly clever pet. They acknowledged Jake's existence when he worked on their environmental systems, sometimes even nodding in approval when he completed repairs quickly and efficiently. But they never really saw him as more than a biological tool, useful for tasks too mundane for their advanced abilities. Jake had been working in the upper levels when the commotion started. The station's docking bay sensors screamed warnings as something massive approached at dangerous speeds. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in red as automated systems prepared for either a crash landing or an attack. Jake dropped his tools and rushed toward the nearest observation deck, arriving just in time to see a sight that made his breath catch. The ship that limped into the docking bay was unlike anything he had ever seen, even after 15 years working around dragon technology. Where most dragon vessels resembled living creatures swimming through space, this one looked like a dying star given form. Its hull pulsed with failing light, and streams of what looked like liquid silver leaked from cracks along its surface. The ship's distress calls echoed through the station's communication systems in the ancient dragon language, urgent, desperate, and filled with a grief so profound that even the translation software struggled to convey its meaning. As the ship settled into the docking clamps with a shudder that Jake felt through the station's superstructure, he realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. Dragons didn't panic. Dragons didn't crash land their ships. Dragons certainly didn't arrive anywhere without the pomp and ceremony their species was known for throughout the galaxy. Yet here was a vessel that screamed of emergency, desperation, and something approaching mortal fear. The airlock cycle seemed to take forever before the ship's passengers finally emerged. Jake had positioned himself behind a maintenance console where he could observe without being noticed, a skill he had perfected over years of working around beings who preferred to forget he existed. What he saw made him question everything he thought he knew about dragons and their supposedly unshakable composure. The first figure to emerge was tall, even by dragon standards, her humanoid form wrapped in robes that seemed to be cut from the night sky itself. Stars literally twinkled in the fabric, and Jake realized he was looking at Queen Celestine, the Empress of 3-star systems and mother to the royal bloodline. Her usually perfect features were drawn with exhaustion and worry, and her normally luminous scales had dulled to the color of tarnished silver. Behind her came a procession of the most powerful beings in known space. Dragons who could level mountains with their breath, sorcerers who commanded forces that human science couldn't even measure, healers whose knowledge spanned millennia of accumulated wisdom. Yet every face Jake could see carried the same expression of helpless frustration and growing despair. It was only when they carried out the final passenger that Jake understood the true nature of the crisis. Princess Seraphina, heir to the dragon throne and daughter of the most powerful magical bloodline in the galaxy, was dying. Her normally radiant form had taken on a translucent quality, as if she were fading from existence itself. The golden scales that should have gleamed like captured sunlight had turned gray and brittle, and her breathing came in shallow, labored gasps that echoed strangely in the station's artificial atmosphere. Jake had heard stories about Princess Seraphina from the traders and diplomats who passed through the station. She was said to be not just beautiful, but genuinely kind, known for her efforts to improve relations between the dragon kingdoms and the younger species. Unlike many of her peers, she had actually spoken directly to humans on several occasions, treating them as equals rather than useful servants. Some of the human merchants claimed she had even learned their languages, though Jake had always assumed those stories were exaggerated. Watching her now, reduced to this fragile state, Jake felt something twist in his chest that he hadn't expected. This wasn't just the death of a political figure or even a member of royalty. This was the loss of someone who had tried to make the galaxy a better place for everyone, regardless of species or status. The royal procession moved through the station's corridors with grim purpose, heading toward the medical bay. Jake followed at a distance, using his knowledge of the station's maintenance passages to stay ahead of the group while remaining unseen. He told himself he was just curious, but the truth was more complicated. Something about the situation felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with politics or protocol. The station's medical bay had been designed to accommodate multiple species, but it still looked woefully inadequate for the group of powerful beings who now filled every available space. Dragon healers worked with desperate intensity, their claws weaving patterns in the air that made reality itself shimmer. Crystalline devices hummed with energies that made Jake's hair stand on end, and incantations in languages older than human civilization echoed off the sterile walls. None of it was working. Jake watched through a maintenance vent as healer after healer attempted their most powerful techniques, only to step back in defeat. The princess's condition continued to deteriorate despite everything they tried. Queen Celestine stood at her daughter's side, her normally commanding presence reduced to that of a desperate mother watching her child slip away. The other dragons whispered among themselves in voices that grew increasingly urgent and increasingly hopeless. The corruption spreads faster than we can counter it. One of the healers reported in the common tongue, his ancient voice heavy with defeat. Whatever poison has taken hold of her operates on principles we don't understand. Our magic can slow its progress, but we cannot stop it, let alone reverse it. There must be something. Queen Celestine's voice carried harmonics that made the station's hull vibrate. Search your libraries, consult the ancient texts, contact the arc sorcerers of the Outer Rings if necessary. I will pay any price, meet any demand. Your Majesty. Another healer spoke with gentle firmness. We have exhausted our knowledge. This is not a wound that can be healed with magic or medicine as we understand them. The corruption attacks not just her physical form, but the very essence of what makes her dragon. It's as if something is systematically dismantling the magical foundations of her existence. Jake didn't understand the technical details of what they were discussing, but he understood the emotions behind the words. These were the most powerful beings in the galaxy, creatures who could reshape matter with thought and command forces that made human technology look like stone tools. Yet they were powerless to save someone they loved. The irony wasn't lost on him. Dragons had always looked down on humans for their reliance on crude, physical methods, when elegant magical solutions existed for every problem. Yet here was a problem that magic couldn't solve, and The dragons were discovering the limitations of their own power. As the hours passed, Jake found himself unable to leave his hidden vantage point. The maintenance ducts were cramped and uncomfortable, but something kept him watching the drama unfold below. Maybe it was professional curiosity. He had spent so many years being invisible that observing without being observed had become second nature. Maybe it was simple human compassion for beings in pain, regardless of their species. Or maybe it was something else, a feeling he couldn't quite identify that suggested the situation was somehow important beyond the obvious tragedy. The princess's condition worsened visibly as the ship's day cycle progressed. The translucent quality of her form became more pronounced, and Jake began to see the medical equipment through her increasingly insubstantial body. Her breathing grew more labored, and the intervals between breaths stretched longer each time. The queen hadn't left her daughter's side in hours, holding vigil with a dedication that transcended species barriers. It was during one of the princess's particularly difficult moments that the accident happened. A power fluctuation in the station's main grid caused the medical bay's lighting to flicker, and the sudden darkness startled one of the healing crystals into overloading. The resulting feedback surge sent dragons scrambling for cover as energy arced across the room like miniature lightning. Jake reacted without thinking, dropping through the maintenance hatch to reach the room's emergency power controls. He had drilled these procedures countless times. Power surges could be deadly in an environment where multiple species with different atmospheric requirements lived in close proximity. His hands moved automatically across the manual override panel, rerouting power through backup systems and isolating the damaged circuits. The emergency lighting came back online just as Jake finished securing the power grid, and only then did he realize his mistake. He was no longer hidden in the maintenance ducts. He stood in full view of the most powerful dragons in the galaxy, his grease-stained hands still on the control panel, his human presence suddenly impossible to ignore. The silence that followed was deafening. Dragons who had been focused entirely on their princess's condition now stared at the human who had materialized in their midst. Jake felt the weight of their attention like a physical force, and for a moment he wondered if he was about to become the shortest-lived maintenance chief in station history. "I'm sorry," he began, stepping back from the controls. The power surge could have damaged the life support systems," and Queen Celestine's voice cut through his stammering explanation. "You fixed the power grid." It wasn't a question, and Jake wasn't sure if the tone was impressed or simply surprised. "Yes, Your Majesty. Standard emergency protocol. The surge could have cascaded through the station's main systems if it wasn't isolated quickly. And you did this without magic?" The question confused Jake until he realized what she was really asking. "Yes, ma'am. Just mechanical knowledge and manual controls." The station was built with multiple redundant systems specifically for this kind of situation. Something shifted in the Queen's expression, though Jake couldn't identify exactly what. She looked from him to her daughter and back again, and Jake caught a glimpse of an idea forming behind her ancient eyes. "Your species relies entirely on physical manipulation of matter and energy," she said slowly. "No magical enhancement, no mystical understanding of reality's underlying structures. Just direct interaction with the material world." Jake nodded, still not sure where the conversation was heading. Around them, the other dragons watched with obvious curiosity, and Jake realized this might be the first time any of them had given serious thought to how humans actually accomplished anything. "Your Majesty," one of the healers interrupted gently, "we should focus on the princess. Time grows short." Queen Celestine's attention snapped back to her daughter, and Jake saw her expression crumble for just a moment before royal composure reasserted itself. The princess's breathing had become even more labored while they had been talking, and Jake could see through her form so clearly now that she seemed more ghost than dragon. "Of course," the queen whispered. "Forgive me. I grasped at hope where none exists." Jake found himself stepping forward before his rational mind could stop him. "Your Majesty, if I may ask, what exactly is wrong with the princess? In simple terms, I mean, not the magical aspects, but what's actually happening to her?" Several dragons stiffened at his presumption, but Queen Celestine raised a claw for silence. "The healers believe she has been poisoned with something that attacks the magical matrix that sustains our life force. It's systematically destroying the connections between her physical form and her essential dragon nature. Soon there will be nothing left to sustain her existence. Jake nodded thoughtfully, processing the explanation through his mechanical understanding of systems and failures. So something is disrupting the connections between different parts of her operating system, for lack of a better term, like a virus that targets the communication protocols between components. The analogy clearly meant nothing to most of the dragons present, but Queen Celestine tilted her head with interest. Continue. Well, Jake said carefully, if magic isn't working because the poison specifically targets magical connections, maybe what she needs isn't more magic. Maybe she needs someone to manually repair the connections, someone who works with physical systems instead of mystical ones. The silence that greeted this suggestion was different from the earlier shock of his sudden appearance. This was the silence of beings considering an impossible possibility, weighing desperate hope against absolute skepticism. You're suggesting, Queen Celestine said slowly, that a human could accomplish what the most powerful healers in the galaxy cannot. Jake realized how ridiculous his suggestion must sound, and he felt heat rise in his cheeks. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I spoke out of turn. I'm just a mechanic. I don't understand magic or healing but you understand systems, the Queen interrupted. You understand how components connect and how connections can be repaired when they fail. Jake nodded hesitantly. Yes, but people aren't machines, and dragons certainly aren't. What if they were? The Queen's voice carried a strange intensity. What if, for the purposes of this problem, the magical connections that sustain life operated on principles similar to the mechanical connections you work with every day? Jake looked at the princess, her form now so translucent that the medical equipment was clearly visible through her body, and felt something click into place in his mind. Not understanding exactly, but recognition of pattern, the kind of intuitive grasp of systematic failure that had made him one of the best maintenance engineers in the sector. I would need to examine the problem directly, he heard himself say, to understand how the connections are supposed to work and identify where the disruptions are occurring. That would require physical contact, one of the healers protested. Dragons do not permit casual touch from other species, particularly during medical procedures. Queen Celestine looked at her daughter's failing form, then at Jake's steady hands, and Jake could see the moment when maternal love overruled royal protocol. Princess Seraphina is dying, she said with quiet finality. Traditional approaches have failed. If there is even the smallest possibility that this human's different perspective could help her, then we will explore that possibility. She fixed Jake with a stare that seemed to look directly into his soul. But know this, human. If you harm my daughter, if this is some elaborate plot, or if your touch hastens her death in any way, there will be nowhere in the galaxy you can hide from my vengeance. Jake swallowed hard but nodded. I understand, Your Majesty, and I promise I'll do everything I can to help her. As he approached the princess's bedside, Jake felt the weight of a dozen powerful gazes upon him. His hands, steady enough to repair delicate instruments while space debris rattled the station, trembled slightly as he reached toward the dying dragon. He had no idea if what he was about to attempt would work, or even if it made any sense. But, looking at Princess Seraphina's fading form, Jake Morrison did what he had always done when faced with a broken system that needed fixing. He reached out to touch the problem and see if he could figure out how to make it work again. The moment Jake's calloused fingers made contact with Princess Seraphina's translucent scales, the universe exploded into sensation. Jake had expected to feel nothing, or perhaps the cool touch of failing flesh, the way a dying engine feels cold even when it should be warm. Instead, his consciousness was suddenly flooded with input that his human brain had no framework for processing. He could sense the princess's life force like a vast network of interconnected pathways, each one carrying something that was simultaneously energy, information, and pure essence of being. And throughout that network, he could feel the corruption. It moved through her systems like acid through circuitry, systematically severing connections and replacing the elegant patterns of dragon life force with something chaotic and destructive. Jake's mechanical mind immediately began categorizing what he was experiencing in terms he could understand. This wasn't unlike a computer virus, but one that operated on the fundamental forces of existence rather than simple data. The poison, for that's clearly what it was, had been designed with diabolical cleverness. It didn't attack the princess's life force directly, which would have triggered her natural defenses, and the healing magic of her attendants. Instead, it targeted the connections themselves, the delicate interfaces between her physical form and her essential dragon nature. By corrupting these connections, it made her increasingly unable to access the magical power that sustained her existence. Jake could feel the princess's life force trying desperately to maintain itself, routing around damaged pathways and attempting to establish new connections to replace the severed ones. But for every new path her body created, the poison adapted and attacked it as well. It was learning from her defenses, evolving to counter her natural healing abilities. "What do you see?" Queen Celestine's voice seemed to come from very far away, though Jake knew she stood directly beside the medical bed. Jake tried to explain what his consciousness was experiencing, but human language lacked words for concepts that existed beyond physical reality. It's like, imagine her life force as a computer network, and someone introduced a virus that specifically targets the network protocols. The data is still there, the hardware is still functional, but the connections that allow different parts of the system to communicate are being systematically corrupted. He paused, still maintaining contact with the princess while his awareness mapped the extent of the damage. The poison isn't random, though. It's intelligent. It's studying her defenses and adapting its attack patterns to counter them. That's why magic isn't working. Every time her natural healing abilities try to repair the damage, the poison learns how to break those specific repairs. "Can you fix it?" The queen's voice carried barely contained desperation. Jake's consciousness followed the pathways of corruption deeper into the princess's essential nature, and what he found there made him gasp aloud. The poison wasn't just severing connections. It was stealing the severed pieces, incorporating them into its own structure. It was literally consuming her dragon nature and using that stolen essence to make itself stronger and more adaptable. "It's worse than I thought," Jake said grimly. "This isn't just disrupting her life force, it's feeding on it. Every time it breaks a connection, it absorbs what it destroys and uses that energy to grow stronger. It's turning her own nature against her." The implications hit him like a physical blow. Traditional healing approaches would not only fail against such a poison, they would actually make it stronger. Every time magical healing tried to restore her connections, the poison would consume those efforts and become more powerful. "That's why all our attempts have failed," one of the healers whispered in horrified understanding. "We weren't fighting the poison, we were feeding it." Jake felt the princess's life force fluctuate beneath his touch, growing weaker as the poison consumed another cluster of connections. Time was running out rapidly, and Jake realized that his diagnostic exploration might have already lasted too long. Soon there wouldn't be enough of her essential nature left to save, regardless of what approach they used. But Jake's mechanical mind had been working on the problem even while he processed the full scope of the disaster. His years of fixing broken systems had taught him that sometimes the best solution wasn't to fight a problem directly, but to approach it from an unexpected angle. "I need to try something," Jake said, his voice tight with concentration. "But I have to warn you, this is going to feel very strange, and it might not work at all." "Do whatever you must," Queen Celestine replied without hesitation. Jake closed his eyes and reached deeper into the princess's failing systems. But instead of trying to repair the damaged connections directly, he began to do something that no dragon healer would ever have considered. He started building new pathways using principles that had nothing to do with magic at all. Human consciousness, Jake had always believed, operated on purely physical principles. Electrical impulses through neural networks, chemical reactions in biological systems, quantum interactions at the cellular level. Humans had no magical nature to corrupt, no mystical essence for the poison to target. What they had was raw, stubborn, mechanical persistence. Jake began carefully constructing bridges between the princess's severed pathways, using his own consciousness as the connecting medium, not trying to restore her dragon nature, but creating temporary mechanical linkages that bypassed the corruption entirely. It was like running new cable between damaged circuit boards, using external connections to route around internal failures. The process was incredibly taxing. Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead as he concentrated on maintaining dozens of simultaneous connections, each one requiring constant attention to keep stable. His consciousness stretched between the princess's damaged systems like a living network cable, carrying information and energy between sections that could no longer communicate directly. By the ancient fires, one of the dragons breathed. What is he doing? He's manually maintaining her life force connections. Queen Celestine whispered with something approaching awe. He's using his own consciousness to replace the pathways that the poison destroyed. The immediate effect was dramatic. Princess Seraphina's breathing became deeper and more regular as critical systems came back online through Jake's makeshift bridges. Color began to return to her scales, and her translucent form solidified visibly. For the first time in hours, she looked like she might actually survive. But Jake knew this was only a temporary solution. Maintaining these connections required his constant attention, and he could already feel the strain building in his mind. He could keep the princess stable for a while, maybe hours, possibly even days if he pushed himself, but he couldn't sustain this effort indefinitely. More importantly, the poison was still active in her system. It couldn't attack Jake's mechanical connections directly since they operated on completely different principles, but it was continuing to consume what remained of her natural pathways. Eventually, there wouldn't be enough of her original dragon nature left to reconnect, even if they found a way to eliminate the poison entirely. This is buying us time, Jake said through gritted teeth, but it's not a cure. I can keep her stable while you work on a permanent solution, but I can't do this forever. How long can you maintain the connections? Queen Celestine asked. Jake honestly wasn't sure. He had never attempted anything remotely like this before, and the mental strain was already considerable. I don't know. Hours. Maybe a day if I'm lucky. But, Your Majesty, there's something else you need to understand. He paused, maintaining his concentration on the princess's life force while formulating his words carefully. The poison is still consuming her dragon nature. Every minute that passes, less of her original self remains. Even if we eliminate the poison completely, we might not be able to restore what's already been lost. The silence that greeted this observation was heavy with implications. Jake could feel the dragons around him processing the possibility that even if they saved the princess's life, she might no longer be truly dragon when she recovered. What would she be? Queen Celestine asked quietly. I don't know, Jake admitted. Physically healthy, certainly. Her basic life functions would operate normally once the poison is eliminated and proper connections are restored. But the essential nature that makes her dragon, her magical abilities, her connection to the ancient powers, that might be permanently damaged. She would be like a human, one of the healers said with obvious distaste. Jake felt a flash of irritation at the tone, but kept his response measured. She would be alive, which is more than she'll be if we don't do something soon. And there might be other possibilities. I don't understand dragon nature well enough to know what could be restored and what couldn't. The libraries, Queen Celestine said suddenly. The ancient archives on Dracarys Prime. If there are precedents for this kind of corruption or records of healing techniques that don't rely on magical connections, they would be there. Your Majesty, one of her advisors spoke carefully. The archives are sealed. The Keeper of Ancient Knowledge doesn't permit access without. The Keeper will permit access. The Queen's voice carried the full authority of absolute rule, or the Keeper will find himself replaced by someone more cooperative. My daughter's life supersedes any bureaucratic protocol. Jake felt the princess's systems fluctuate under his mental touch, and he had to quickly adjust several of his makeshift connections to compensate. The effort sent a spike of pain through his head, and he realized that the strain was building faster than he had hoped. Your Majesty, Jake said carefully, I need to ask something that might sound strange. Is there any chance this poison was specifically designed to target dragons? The way it operates, the intelligence behind its adaptation. This doesn't feel like a natural toxin or even a conventional weapon. Queen Celestine's expression darkened with understanding. You think this was an assassination attempt? I think this was something more than that, Jake replied. The poison isn't just trying to kill her, it's trying to completely erase her dragon nature. Someone wanted to make sure that even if she survived, she wouldn't be capable of fulfilling her role as heir to the throne. The implications sent ripples of alarm through the assembled dragons. An attack on the princess was an attack on the entire royal line, but an attack specifically designed to corrupt her essential nature suggested something far more sinister than simple political rivalry. Who would have the knowledge to create such a weapon? Queen Celestine demanded. Someone who understands dragon physiology intimately, Jake said, his concentration wavering slightly as he spoke. And someone with access to the princess at the exact moment when her defenses would be lowest. This poison had to be administered at precisely the right time and in exactly the right way to achieve this level of systematic corruption. The accusation hung unspoken in the air. This had been an inside job, carried out by someone the princess trusted enough to get close to her. Jake felt another wave of deterioration in the princess's systems and had to quickly rebuild two of his mental bridges before they collapsed entirely. The effort left him gasping, and he could see concern growing on Queen Celestine's face. "How can we help you?" she asked. "What do you need to maintain the connections more easily?" Jake considered the question while carefully monitoring the princess's stability. "I don't think there's anything you can do to make this easier, but there might be ways to make it more sustainable. If some of your healers could take over monitoring her basic life functions, breathing, circulation, that sort of thing, I could focus entirely on maintaining the essential connections." Of course, the queen gestured to her healers, who immediately began adjusting their crystalline instruments to track the princess's vital signs. The redistribution of effort helped noticeably, allowing Jake to concentrate on the most critical pathways while the dragon healers handled routine biological maintenance. But he could still feel his mental reserves depleting steadily, and he knew this arrangement couldn't continue indefinitely. "There's something else," Jake said hesitantly. "I'm getting a sense that the poison might be traceable. It's not just destroying connections randomly. It's following specific patterns, almost like it has a signature or a fingerprint embedded in its structure. You can identify its origin?" One of the healers asked with sudden interest. "Maybe. The corruption patterns seem consistent with particular magical techniques. I can't interpret what I'm seeing directly, but someone with the right knowledge might be able to use this information to identify who created the poison." Queen Celestine's eyes gleamed with dangerous promise. "Then we will find someone with that knowledge. And when we do, they will answer for what they have done to my daughter." Jake felt the princess stir slightly beneath his touch, and for a moment he thought she might be regaining consciousness. Her systems stabilized noticeably, and some of the strain on his makeshift connections eased. "Princess." Queen Celestine leaned forward hopefully. Seraphina's eyes opened slowly, their normally brilliant gold now dim but aware. She tried to speak, but only a whisper emerged. "Mother, what happened?" "I feel different." Queen Celestine took her daughter's claw carefully in her own. "You were poisoned, my dear. This human is helping to keep you stable while we search for a cure." Princess Seraphina's gaze found Jake's face, and he saw intelligence and gratitude in her expression despite her weakened state. "Thank you," she whispered. "I can feel your mind touching mine. It's strange but not unpleasant." Jake managed a tired smile. "Just doing my job, Your Highness. Try to rest. We're working on getting you fixed up properly." "Fixed up," she repeated with the ghost of a smile. "Like a machine that needs repair. I suppose I am rather broken at the moment." The casual acceptance in her voice struck Jake as remarkably brave. Here was someone who had lost most of her essential nature, possibly forever, and she was making jokes about it. "We'll find a way to restore what was taken," Queen Celestine said firmly. "I promise you that." Princess Seraphina squeezed her mother's claw weakly. "Even if you can't, I'm still alive. Thanks to our human friend here. That's more than I had any right to expect a few hours ago." Jake felt another surge of respect for the princess, but also a renewed determination to find a real solution. Temporary bridges built from human stubbornness might keep her alive, but she deserved better than a half-existence dependent on his constant attention. "Your Majesty," Jake said carefully, "I have an idea that might help with the long-term problem, but it would require taking some significant risks, and I'm not sure how your people would feel about it." "Speak freely," Queen Celestine commanded. "What if we don't try to restore her original dragon nature at all?" Jake said, "What if instead we build her something new, a hybrid system that combines the best aspects of both dragon and human approaches to consciousness?" The suggestion was met with stunned silence. Jake pressed on before anyone could object. The poison targeted her magical connections because that's how dragon consciousness operates. But human consciousness works on completely different principles, ones that the poison can't corrupt. If we could somehow integrate those principles into her essential nature, she might end up stronger than she was before. "You're suggesting turning her into some kind of hybrid being," one of the healers said with obvious horror. "I'm suggesting giving her the best of both worlds," Jake corrected. "Dragon power and wisdom combined with human adaptability and resilience. She would be unique, certainly, but not diminished. Princess Seraphina's eyes brightened with interest despite her weakened state. What would that feel like? Jay considered how to explain the concept. Imagine having all your natural abilities, but backed up by systems that operate on completely different principles. If someone tried to poison your magical nature again, the mechanical aspects of your consciousness would keep you stable while you fought back. You'd be harder to hurt and harder to kill. And she would still be my daughter? Queen Celestine asked quietly. More than ever, Jake said with conviction. Everything that makes her who she is would remain intact. We'd just be adding new layers of protection and capability. The princess tried to sit up, and Jake carefully adjusted his mental connections to accommodate the movement. I want to try it, she said firmly. If this human is willing to attempt something so unprecedented, the least I can do is trust his judgment. Queen Celestine looked at her daughter's determined expression, then at Jake's tired but resolute face, and Jake could see the moment when maternal protectiveness gave way to royal pragmatism. Very well, she said, but we proceed carefully with full monitoring and the ability to reverse course if anything goes wrong. Jake nodded, already beginning to formulate the complex procedure in his mind. What he was proposing had never been attempted before, and the risks were enormous. But looking at Princess Seraphina's trusting expression, he knew he would do everything in his power to make it work. The hardest part wouldn't be the technical challenges, considerable though they were. The hardest part would be convincing a galaxy full of magical beings that sometimes the best solution came from the most unmagical source imaginable. But Jake Morrison had spent his entire life fixing things that everyone else said couldn't be fixed. And he wasn't about to stop now. The process of creating a hybrid consciousness turned out to be far more complex than Jake had initially imagined. Over the following days, as he maintained his exhausting vigil at Princess Seraphina's side, a small army of dragon scholars, healers, and technicians worked around the clock to understand and implement his unprecedented solution. The first challenge had been purely technical. Dragon healers operated on intuition and mystical understanding, while Jake's approach required precise mechanical analysis. Bridging that gap meant developing an entirely new vocabulary that could describe consciousness in terms both species could comprehend. Master Healer Veilthorn, the oldest and most experienced of the Queen's medical advisors, had initially been the most skeptical of Jake's proposal. Dragons, he argued, were beings of pure magical essence. Attempting to integrate mundane mechanical principles into their nature was not just unprecedented, it was potentially blasphemous. But as Jake demonstrated the stability his makeshift bridges provided, and, more importantly, as Princess Seraphina remained conscious and alert despite the continuing presence of the poison, even Veilthorn's resistance began to weaken. Show me again how these connections operate, the ancient healer requested for the dozenth time, his scaled fingers tracing patterns in the air above diagnostic crystals that monitored the princess's condition. Jake, fighting off exhaustion that came from maintaining constant mental contact with another being's consciousness, tried once more to explain concepts that had no dragon equivalent. Think of it like building a road between two cities. Your magical healing tries to restore the original path, but the poison keeps destroying those repairs because it recognizes the magical signature. My approach builds a completely different kind of road, one the poison doesn't know how to attack because it's made from materials that don't exist in its programming. But roads made from human consciousness, Veilthorn mused. How can such crude matter support the refined energies of dragon essence? The question revealed the fundamental bias that had made this crisis so dangerous in the first place. Dragons saw human consciousness as inherently inferior, simpler, cruder, less capable than their own refined magical awareness. What they failed to understand was that simplicity could be a strength rather than a weakness. Human consciousness isn't crude, Jake said patiently, though his tone carried an edge of frustration. It's different. We've had to develop approaches that work without magic because we never had magic to rely on. That means our mental processes operate on principles that magical attacks can't touch. Princess Seraphina stirred on her medical bed, her voice still weak, but growing stronger as Jake's bridges continued to stabilize her condition. He's right, Master Veilthorn. I can feel the difference between my natural pathways and the bridges he's built. The natural ones feel elegant and flowing but fragile. His connections feel solid. Permanent, like they're anchored to something the poison can't reach. Because they are, Jake explained. Human consciousness is built on biological structures that operate according to physical laws. Chemistry, electrical conductivity, quantum mechanics, forces that exist independent of magical manipulation. The poison might be able to corrupt mystical connections, but it can't rewrite the laws of physics. The breakthrough had come when Princess Seraphina herself suggested a way to test Jake's hybrid approach without committing to permanent changes. If Jake could teach her to build mechanical-style connections using her own consciousness, they could gradually replace the corrupted pathways without relying entirely on his increasingly strained mental bridges. It would be like learning a new language, she had proposed. I would still be dragon, but I would also be able to think in human patterns when necessary. The idea had horrified several of the traditionalist healers, but Queen Celestine had seen its potential immediately. A dragon who could operate on both magical and mechanical principles would be virtually impossible to defeat using conventional attacks. More importantly for their immediate situation, it would allow Jake to gradually transfer responsibility for maintaining the connections back to the princess herself. The learning process proved to be unlike anything anyone had anticipated. Princess Seraphina approached the challenge with the intellectual curiosity that had made her a respected diplomat, but even her considerable intelligence struggled with concepts that operated on such alien principles. I don't understand how you can think without accessing the fundamental forces, she said during one of their practice sessions. How do you solve problems without drawing on the underlying patterns of reality? Jake laughed tiredly. We make it up as we go along. Humans don't have access to underlying patterns, so we have to build our own. We observe, we hypothesize, we test, we adapt. It's messier than your approach, but it's also more flexible. Show me, she said with determination. Jake guided her consciousness through the process of building a mechanical-style connection, not by accessing mystical energies, but by understanding the physical requirements and engineering a solution from available resources. It was like teaching someone to build a bridge using only materials they could see and touch, rather than summoning the bridge into existence through magical command. The princess's first successful attempt created a connection so crude that it barely functioned, but it worked according to purely physical principles. More importantly, the poison completely ignored it. It doesn't even recognize this as a target, she said with wonder. To the corruption, this connection doesn't exist at all. Exactly, Jay confirmed. Magic attacks can only affect magical targets. Build something that operates on non-magical principles, and magical attacks become irrelevant. The progress after that first success was rapid. Princess Seraphina proved to be a remarkably quick study, and her existing understanding of consciousness made it easier for her to grasp the underlying concepts once she stopped trying to approach them magically. Within 3 days, she had learned to maintain basic life support connections using hybrid techniques. Within a week, she was constructing complex bridging networks that rivaled the stability of Jake's original emergency repairs. And throughout the process, her natural dragon abilities remained intact, enhanced, if anything, by the additional layer of protection the mechanical connections provided. But the truly revolutionary discovery came when they attempted to eliminate the poison entirely. Traditional approaches had failed because the poison adapted to magical attacks, learning from each attempt and becoming stronger. But when Princess Seraphina used her new hybrid consciousness to attack the corruption, something unprecedented happened. The poison couldn't adapt to her assault because it couldn't understand the principles she was using. When she attacked it magically, it responded with its usual adaptive defenses. But when she simultaneously attacked it mechanically, using consciousness patterns based on physical laws rather than mystical ones, it had no framework for defense. It's like fighting someone with one hand while punching them with another hand they can't see. Princess Seraphina observed with grim satisfaction as she systematically dismantled the corruption in her essential nature. The poison keeps adapting to my magical attacks, while my mechanical approaches destroy it from angles it doesn't know exist. Jake monitored the process through his remaining bridges, marveling at the elegant efficiency of her dual approach. Where either method alone would have failed, the combination proved devastatingly effective. But The most remarkable development was what happened to the princess herself as the poison was eliminated and her hybrid consciousness fully integrated. Rather than feeling diminished by the addition of mechanical thinking patterns, she reported feeling more complete than ever before. The rigid elegance of dragon consciousness combined with human adaptability created something entirely new, a form of awareness that was simultaneously more stable and more flexible than either species had achieved alone. "I can feel the difference," she explained to her mother and the assembled healers. "Before, my consciousness was like a perfect crystal, beautiful and strong but brittle. If something could crack it, the whole structure would shatter. Now it's like a crystal embedded in flexible metal. The magical aspects remain perfect and beautiful, but they're supported by something that can bend without breaking." Queen Celestine examined her daughter's transformed nature with the careful attention of someone who had ruled for centuries and learned to recognize significant changes. What she found there clearly exceeded her expectations. "You are still completely dragon," she said with obvious relief. "But you're also something more. Your magical abilities appear to be not just intact, but enhanced. The mechanical foundations provide a stable platform for magical operations," Princess Seraphina confirmed. "I can channel more power more safely because the physical aspects of my consciousness can handle stress that would overload purely magical pathways." Jake, finally, able to relax for the first time in over a week, watched the family reunion with satisfaction. The immediate crisis was over. The princess was not just alive, but stronger than before, and the hybrid approach had proven successful beyond anyone's hopes. But even as he celebrated the victory, Jake was aware that they had accomplished something far more significant than simply saving one life. They had demonstrated that the galaxy's traditional assumptions about the relative value of different species and approaches to consciousness were fundamentally flawed. The implications began to sink in as word of the princess's recovery spread throughout the dragon community. If humans could provide solutions that magic couldn't, if mechanical approaches could enhance rather than diminish magical abilities, then the entire basis for the galaxy's social hierarchy needed to be reconsidered. "This changes everything," Master Healer Veilthorn admitted during one of their follow-up consultations. "We have always assumed that magical approaches were inherently superior to mundane ones. But you've demonstrated that integration rather than supremacy might be the true path to advancement." Jake nodded, though he could see the broader implications worried many of the dragons present. For centuries, they had justified their dominant position in galactic society by claiming inherent superiority based on their magical abilities. Now they were being forced to consider the possibility that their assumed inferiors might have valuable contributions to make. "It doesn't mean magic is wrong or inferior," Jake said diplomatically. "It just means different approaches can complement each other. Dragons and humans working together can accomplish things that neither species could achieve alone." Princess Seraphina, whose hybrid consciousness gave her unique insight into both perspectives, became an eloquent advocate for this new understanding. "We've been so focused on our own magnificence that we failed to see the magnificence in others," she told the assembled court during her first public appearance since the poisoning. "Jake didn't heal me by proving that humans are superior to dragons. He healed me by showing that cooperation creates possibilities that competition never could. But not everyone was ready to accept such revolutionary ideas." News of the princess's transformation and the role humans had played in her recovery sparked intense debate throughout the dragon territories. Traditional factions argued that accepting help from inferior species set a dangerous precedent that could undermine the entire foundation of dragon authority. "If we admit that humans can solve problems we cannot," one traditionalist lord argued during a heated council session, "what happens to our legitimacy as rulers? Why should other species accept our authority if we cannot even heal our own royal family without outside assistance?" Queen Celestine's response became one of the defining statements of what historians would later call the Great Awakening. "Our legitimacy," she declared with regal authority, "comes not from the illusion of perfection, but from our wisdom in recognizing truth wherever it appears. A ruler who cannot learn, who cannot adapt, who cannot acknowledge the value in others, is no ruler at all, but merely a tyrant whose fall is inevitable." Jake found himself at the center of galactic attention in ways that made him deeply uncomfortable. Humans throughout the known systems began to look at him as a symbol of their species' potential, while dragons debated whether his success represented opportunity or threat. But the most significant change was happening on a personal level, in the relationship between Jake and Princess Seraphina. Their extended mental connection during her recovery had created a bond unlike anything either species had previously experienced. "I can still sense the patterns you taught me," she told him during one of their private conversations. "Not just the technical aspects, but the way you think about problems. The patience, the persistence, the refusal to give up even when the situation seems hopeless." Jake smiled, feeling awkward about the praise. "Those aren't specifically human traits. I think you'd find them in any species that's had to work for everything they've achieved." "Perhaps," she agreed. "But dragons have had power for so long that we've forgotten what it feels like to struggle, to fail, to have to try again. You've reminded me that sometimes the greatest strength comes from admitting weakness and asking for help." The conversation was interrupted by urgent chimes from the station's communication system. Queen Celestine's voice echoed through the corridors with unmistakable authority and barely controlled anger. "All personnel to emergency stations. We have identified the source of the poison that nearly killed my daughter. The perpetrator is someone we trusted, someone who had access to the most intimate details of the royal family's medical information." Jake felt ice forming in his stomach. Throughout the crisis, they had all known that the poisoning had been an inside job, but facing the reality of betrayal by someone close to the royal family was somehow worse than dealing with an unknown external enemy. "Who?" Princess Seraphina asked, though Jake could see in her expression that she already suspected the answer. Queen Celestine's response confirmed their worst fears. "Lord Malachar, my most trusted advisor and the architect of our diplomatic initiatives with the younger species. He used his position to gain access to detailed information about your physiology, then created a poison specifically designed to corrupt your essential nature without triggering our defensive capabilities." The revelation struck Jake like a physical blow. Lord Malachar had been one of the most progressive voices in dragon society, a strong advocate for improving relations with humans and other non-magical species. If someone like him could be behind the assassination attempt, then the political implications were staggering. "What?" Princess Seraphina whispered, and Jake could hear the personal pain in her voice. Malachar had been her mentor, someone she had trusted and respected. "Because he believed that your diplomatic efforts were weakening dragon supremacy," Queen Celestine replied grimly. "He saw your willingness to work with other species as a threat to our traditional authority. Rather than allow you to continue promoting cooperation and integration, he chose to remove you from the succession entirely." Jake realized with growing alarm that Malachar's betrayal went far beyond simple political disagreement. The poison hadn't been designed just to kill the princess. It had been engineered to make sure that even if she survived, she would no longer be capable of ruling dragons effectively. By corrupting her essential dragon nature, Malachar had intended to eliminate her as a potential heir while maintaining plausible deniability. "Where is he now?" Jake asked. "Unknown," the queen admitted with frustration. "He disappeared shortly after your healing efforts proved successful. But we will find him, and when we do, he will answer for his crimes." Princess Seraphina was quiet for a long moment, processing the betrayal and its implications. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a determination that reminded Jake why she was considered a natural leader. "Then, we need to be prepared for what comes next," she said. "Malachar didn't act alone. This kind of conspiracy requires support and resources. And now that his initial plan has failed, he'll try something else." Jake nodded grimly, realizing that their victory over the poison might have been just the opening battle in a much larger conflict. They had saved the princess's life and demonstrated the value of human-dragon cooperation, but they had also made powerful enemies who would do anything to preserve the traditional order. The galaxy was about to discover that changing fundamental assumptions about power and cooperation was never a peaceful process. And Jake Morrison, a simple maintenance chief who had stumbled into the middle of a royal crisis, was about to learn that fixing broken systems sometimes meant breaking a few others first. The attack came 3 days after Lord Malachar's disappearance, striking with a precision that confirmed Jake's worst suspicions about the scope of the conspiracy they faced. Jake was working in the station's lower maintenance levels when the first explosions rocked the superstructure. Not random sabotage, he realized immediately, but carefully targeted strikes designed to cripple specific systems. The fusion reactors remained untouched. Whoever was behind this wanted the station functional, not destroyed. Instead, the attacks focused on communication arrays, defensive systems, and, most tellingly, the docking bay mechanisms that would prevent ships from leaving. "They're not trying to kill us," Jake muttered as he fought his way through smoke-filled corridors toward the medical bay. "They're trying to trap us here." The implications were chilling. Someone wanted Queen Celestine, Princess Seraphina, and Jake himself isolated and vulnerable. This wasn't random terrorism. It was a coordinated assault designed to finish what the poisoning had started. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as Jake reached the medical sector. He found chaos waiting for him. Dragons who could level mountains with their breath, struggling to coordinate a defense against enemies they couldn't identify. The attackers weren't showing themselves directly, instead using automated weapons and remote-controlled explosives that gave no indication of who was controlling them. "Jake!" Princess Seraphina's voice cut through the noise as he entered the medical bay. She had recovered enough to be mobile, though Jake could see the strain in her movements as her hybrid consciousness worked to maintain stability under stress. "Your Majesty," Jake addressed Queen Celestine, who stood in the center of the chaos like an island of deadly calm. "This isn't random. Someone knows exactly how this station operates, and they know our current positions. We're dealing with inside information." "Malachar," the Queen growled, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. "But he's not here. Someone else is coordinating this attack." Jake's mind raced through possibilities as another explosion shook the station. The timing was too precise, the targeting too specific. This level of coordination required someone with intimate knowledge of both the station's systems and the royal party's current location. "Who else knew about the princess's recovery timeline?" Jake asked. "Who had access to your security briefings and medical schedules?" Queen Celestine's expression darkened as the implications hit her. "The inner circle, my most trusted advisors, the senior healers, the guard commanders." She paused, and Jake saw the moment when suspicion crystallized into certainty. "Commander Thalaris. He's been coordinating our security throughout this crisis." As if summoned by her words, Commander Thalaris himself appeared in the medical bay's entrance. Jake had met the Dragon Commander several times over the past week, a seemingly competent and loyal officer who had been responsible for protecting the royal family during their stay on the station. Now, seeing Thalaris framed in the doorway, with emergency lighting playing across his scales, Jake realized how perfectly positioned the commander had been to orchestrate both the original poisoning and the current attack. "Your Majesty," Thalaris said with elaborate courtesy, "I'm here to escort you to a secure location. The attackers have breached our outer defenses." "Have they?" Queen Celestine's voice carried dangerous undertones. "How interesting that you know so much about their capabilities." Jake saw the moment when Thalaris realized his deception had been discovered. The commander's expression shifted from feigned concern to cold calculation, and Jake caught a glimpse of the mind that had orchestrated the systematic betrayal of the royal family's trust. "You always were too clever for your own good, my queen," Thalaris said, abandoning all pretense. "Unfortunately, your intelligence comes too late to save you." The attack came with lightning speed. Not magical fire or energy bolts, but something far more insidious. Thalaris activated a device that filled the medical bay with a field that Jake's enhanced senses immediately recognized as another version of the corruption that had nearly killed Princess Seraphina. But this version was different, refined, and improved based on what Malachar and his conspirators had learned from their first attempt. Instead of slowly corrupting individual connections, this airborne version attacked the fundamental interface between consciousness and reality itself. Jake felt the attack hit his awareness like acid, try to sever the connections that allowed his mind to interact with the physical world. Around him, dragons who had faced down armies without flinching collapsed as their consciousness was forcibly disconnected from their ability to channel magical power. Only Princess Seraphina remained standing, her hybrid nature providing exactly the protection Jake had hoped for. The corruption tried to attack her magical pathways and found mechanical backups it couldn't touch. When it attempted to disrupt her mechanical consciousness, it encountered magical defenses it couldn't understand. "Impossible!" Thalaris snarled as his weapon failed to affect the princess. The improved version should have overcome any defenses you developed. It probably would have, Princess Seraphina replied with grim satisfaction, if I were still purely dragon. But I'm something new now, something your conspiracy never planned for. Jake forced himself to his feet despite the continuing assault on his consciousness. As a pure human, he was somewhat less vulnerable to attacks designed for dragon physiology, but the field was still trying to tear apart the connections between his mind and body. Princess, he gasped through gritted teeth. Can you shut down whatever he's using? Already working on it, she replied, her hybrid consciousness allowing her to operate on multiple levels simultaneously. Jake watched in fascination as she approached Thalorus's device, not with magical attacks that it was designed to counter, but with mechanical understanding that analyzed its function and systematically dismantled its operation. The corruption field collapsed within seconds, leaving Thalorus staring in shock at his disabled weapon. You're no longer dragon, he accused, as if her survival were somehow cheating. I'm still dragon, Princess Seraphina corrected firmly. I'm just more than only dragon. And that difference is about to end your conspiracy permanently. But even as she spoke, Jake realized that Thalorus had served his purpose. The attack on the station hadn't been meant to kill them. It had been a distraction, keeping their attention focused locally while something much larger unfolded elsewhere. Your Majesty, Jake said urgently, we need to check the communication logs. This whole attack feels like misdirection. Queen Celestine, recovering from the consciousness attack, immediately grasped his concern. What could be more important than eliminating the royal family? Legitimacy, Jake replied grimly. If they can't kill you, they might try to replace you. The horrible realization struck all of them simultaneously. While they had been trapped on the station dealing with Thalorus's attack, Malachar and his co-conspirators had been free to act elsewhere. With Queen Celestine and Princess Seraphina apparently dead or missing, and the succession line in question, someone else could claim emergency authority over the dragon territories. The Regency protocols, Princess Seraphina whispered in horror. If both mother and are declared dead or incapacitated, temporary authority passes to the Council of Lords until succession can be formally resolved. A council that Malachar has had years to infiltrate and corrupt, Queen Celestine added with growing alarm. Jake's human perspective provided a clarity that the dragon's emotional involvement obscured. This isn't about killing you. It's about creating a power vacuum that they can fill. The poisoning was meant to eliminate the princess quietly. When that failed, they switched to a plan that would remove both of you publicly while giving them legal justification for taking control. We have to get back to Dracarys Prime, the queen declared, her royal authority reasserting itself despite their dire circumstances. With what? Jake asked practically. They've disabled the docking bay mechanisms. Even if we could repair them, it would take hours we don't have. Princess Seraphina was quiet for a moment, her hybrid consciousness working through possibilities that pure dragon thinking might not consider. What if we don't need the docking bays? Princess, her mother prompted. Jake taught me to think mechanically about problems, Seraphina explained. Dragons always approach space travel magically. We use our ship's mystical systems to navigate hyperspace and manipulate gravitational fields. But humans use purely physical principles for space travel, don't they? Jake began to see where her thinking was leading, and the possibilities both thrilled and terrified him. You're talking about using mechanical propulsion and navigation. But Princess, your ship's mystical systems aren't designed to interface with that kind of technology. But my consciousness is, she replied with growing excitement. I can operate on both magical and mechanical principles simultaneously. I could manually control the ship's physical systems while using magical awareness to navigate. It was theoretically possible, Jake realized, but incredibly dangerous. Dragon ships relied on mystical systems for everything from life support to structural integrity. Attempting to pilot one using mechanical principles would be like trying to perform surgery while wearing blindfolds. Even if it works, Queen Celestine said hesitantly, the political situation may already be beyond repair. If Malachar has convinced the Council of Lords that we're dead, then we prove we're not, Princess Seraphina replied with determination. And we do it in a way that demonstrates why cooperation between species is stronger than any conspiracy based on supremacy and fear. Jake understood what she was proposing, and The audacity of it left him speechless. She wanted to return to Dracarys Prime, piloting her ship through a combination of dragon magic and human engineering, accompanied by the very human who had saved her life. The symbolism would be impossible to ignore. The heir to the dragon throne working as an equal partner with a member of the species many dragons still considered inferior. It's brilliant, he admitted, and completely insane. If we crash, we not only die but prove their point about the dangers of cooperation. If we don't try, Princess Seraphina countered, they win by default. The conspiracy succeeds, cooperation between species is discredited, and the galaxy returns to the old patterns of supremacy and subjugation. Queen Celestine looked at her daughter with an expression of pride and terror in equal measure. You're certain you can control both magical and mechanical systems simultaneously? I've been doing exactly that for over a week now, the princess replied confidently. This is just applying the same principles on a larger scale. Jake realized that his role in this desperate gambit would go far beyond simple technical consultation. If Princess Seraphina was going to pilot her ship using hybrid techniques, she would need someone who understood both the mechanical systems she was interfacing with and the stress such unprecedented integration would place on her consciousness. I'll need to maintain a connection with you throughout the flight, he said, to monitor the integration and help stabilize any conflicts between magical and mechanical approaches. Is that possible? Queen Celestine asked. Jake thought about the mental bridges he had built during the princess's recovery and the deep understanding of her consciousness he had developed through their extended connection. It should be. We've already demonstrated that human and dragon consciousness can work together successfully. Then we proceed, the queen declared with royal finality. Commander Thalaris, you will provide us with access to my daughter's ship, or you will discover exactly why Dragon Vengeance is feared throughout the galaxy. Thalaris, stripped of his weapons and facing the combined will of beings he had underestimated, had little choice but to cooperate. As they made their way toward the royal ship's berth, Jake couldn't help but marvel at how completely the situation had reversed. A week ago, he had been an invisible maintenance worker whose greatest concern was keeping the station's air circulation functioning properly. Now he was preparing to co-pilot a Dragon Royal vessel on a mission to save both a government and the future of interspecies cooperation. But as they reached the ship's elegant curves and began the complex process of preparing for departure, Jake realized that the greatest challenges still lay ahead. Getting to Dracarys Prime would require unprecedented cooperation between human and dragon consciousness. Proving their legitimacy once they arrived would require even more. And somewhere in the vast palace complexes of the dragon homeworld, Lord Malachar and his conspirators were preparing to discover that reports of the royal family's demise had been greatly exaggerated. The real battle for the future of the galaxy was about to begin, and Jake Morrison found himself exactly where he had always been most comfortable, in the middle of a complex system that needed fixing, with tools that weren't quite adequate for the job, and no choice but to make them work anyway. Some things, he reflected as Princess Seraphina's ship powered up with a harmony of magical resonance and mechanical precision, never really changed. The journey to Dracarys Prime became a revelation that neither Jake nor Princess Seraphina had anticipated. Flying a dragon ship through the hybrid approach they had developed created an experience unlike anything either species had achieved before. Jake's consciousness merged seamlessly with the princess's as she manipulated both magical and mechanical systems simultaneously, and the result was a form of space travel that transcended the limitations of either approach alone. Where dragon ships typically moved through hyperspace by bending reality around mystical principles, and human vessels relied on calculated trajectories through physically understood dimensions, their hybrid method allowed them to navigate spaces that existed between the two paradigms. They could slip through mystical pathways when convenient and drop in a normal space when precision maneuvering required mechanical exactitude. This is extraordinary, Princess Seraphina murmured as they emerged from a hyperspace fold that had taken them halfway across the galaxy in a matter of hours. I can feel the ship responding to intentions I didn't even know I could form. Jake, maintaining his connection to her consciousness while simultaneously monitoring the vessel's mechanical systems, shared her amazement. It's like having access to a completely new set of tools. We're not just adding magical enhancement to mechanical systems or mechanical backup to magical ones. We're creating something that operates on entirely different principles. Queen Celestine, who had been quietly observing their unprecedented cooperation, spoke with the thoughtful tone of someone processing implications that extended far beyond their immediate situation. You're describing a fundamental evolution in how consciousness can interact with reality itself. More than that, Jake replied as he helped Princess Seraphina navigate around a gravity well that would have been dangerous for either pure magical or pure mechanical approaches. We're proving that cooperation creates possibilities that competition never could. Two species working together as equals can achieve things that neither could accomplish through domination or subordination. The princess's hybrid consciousness allowed her to perceive the political situation on Dracarys Prime with unprecedented clarity as they approached the dragon homeworld. Traditional magical scrying revealed the obvious aspects of Lord Malakar's conspiracy. The emergency sessions of the Council of Lords, the formal declarations of Regency authority, the mobilization of military forces loyal to the traditional faction. But Jake's mechanical approach to information analysis detected patterns that magical observation missed. Communication frequencies, resource allocation schedules, personnel movement logs, all the mundane administrative details that revealed how thoroughly Malakar had prepared for his coup. He's been planning this for years, Princess Seraphina observed grimly as they reviewed the data. The network of supporters he's built, the legal precedents he's established, the infrastructure he's put in place. This isn't opportunism. This is systematic preparation for overthrowing the royal line. Which means he'll have contingency plans for our return, Jake added. He won't be surprised that we're alive, and he'll be ready with explanations for why we shouldn't be trusted or why our survival doesn't invalidate his authority. Queen Celestine's expression carried the cold fury of a ruler who had discovered the full extent of betrayal by someone she had trusted. Then, we ensure that his preparations become irrelevant. Malakar has built his conspiracy on the assumption that traditional dragon supremacy is the only viable form of government. We're about to demonstrate that he is catastrophically wrong. Their approach to Dracarys Prime was deliberately dramatic. Instead of following standard protocols and requesting permission to land, Princess Seraphina brought her ship directly to the Grand Palace using flight patterns that showcased the hybrid navigation techniques she had mastered. The ship danced through atmospheric layers with impossible grace, simultaneously obeying the laws of physics and transcending them through magical manipulation. To observers on the ground, it looked like the princess had somehow convinced reality itself to cooperate with her intentions. Every dragon on the planet is watching this, Princess Seraphina reported as her enhanced awareness detected the attention their arrival was generating. Whatever we do, next will be seen by the entire population. Good, Queen Celestine replied with royal satisfaction. Let them see what their heir has become, and let them see the human who helped make it possible. Jake felt a moment of anxiety as the implications hit him fully. In a few minutes, he would be standing before the most powerful beings in the galaxy as living proof that human and dragon cooperation could achieve unprecedented results. The political ramifications were staggering, but the personal pressure was even more intense. Princess, he said hesitantly, are you sure about including me in your public appearance? I'm just a maintenance worker. Having me stand beside dragon royalty might send the wrong message about what? She interrupted firmly. About the value of honest work? About the importance of judging beings by their actions rather than their birth circumstances? About the strength that comes from cooperation rather than hierarchy? Jake realized she was right. His presence beside her wouldn't undermine her authority. It would demonstrate the kind of leadership she represented. A ruler who could recognize value wherever she found it, and work as an equal partner with beings regardless of their species or social status. The ship settled onto the palace's main landing platform with perfect precision, its hybrid systems allowing Princess Seraphina to achieve a level of control that pure dragon or pure human approaches couldn't match. As the engines powered down, Jake could see crowds gathering at every available vantage point to witness the return of their supposedly dead princess. But even as they prepared to disembark, Jake's mechanical analysis detected problems with their reception. The platform was surrounded by guards whose positioning suggested hostile rather than protective intent, and The communication frequencies showed intensive coordination between forces loyal to Malakar's faction. "They're not planning to welcome us home," Jake warned. "This feels like an arrest rather than a royal reception." Princess Seraphina's hybrid awareness confirmed his assessment. "Lord Malakar has declared us imposters, mystical constructs created by enemies of the state to destabilize the regency. He's claiming that our survival proves we were never truly dragon to begin with." The audacity of the accusation was breathtaking, but Jake could see the political logic behind it. By questioning the princess's essential nature, Malakar could argue that her transformation through hybrid consciousness made her unfit to rule dragons who valued magical purity above all else. "So we prove him wrong," Queen Celestine declared as the ship's airlock cycled open. "We demonstrate that my daughter is not diminished by her new capabilities, but enhanced by them." What followed became known throughout galactic history as the demonstration of unity. As they emerged from the ship, Lord Malakar and his supporters were waiting with the full pageantry of traditional dragon authority. Malakar himself wore the ceremonial regalia of the regent, surrounded by council members who had formally declared their support for his emergency leadership. "Halt!" Malakar commanded with impressive dramatic flair. "You who were the form of our beloved queen and princess will submit to verification of your true nature. We will not permit enemies of the state to masquerade as our deceased royalty." Princess Seraphina stepped forward with the confident grace of someone